Welcome to the museum. This event is funded by National Lottery Heritage Fund and Talks, the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities. Welcome to the Pitt Rivers. My name's Andrew McLellan. For the next hour, we're going to talk about Beyond the Binary gallery interventions. And before we start, I just want to put it into some kind of context about what we're doing with the interventions, because this isn't just about LGBT voices. It's not just about Beyond the Binary. It's about changes in the museum itself. So one of the aims of interventions is that when visitors come into the museum, whoever they are, they recognise themselves and their voices in the museum, whether that's people from the local LGBTQ+ community talking about views on gender, or whether it's Multaka volunteers talking about the relevance of Mbira in Zimbabwe, or the Maasai talking about fire making.
Remind me to turn it up when I start filming you.
Oh, you're not on mute today, Josie. When we look back in 30 years, we'll find it hard to believe that in the 20th century, it was difficult to find representation of any voices other than museum curators. And this has been a slow change over time, but it's gathering pace and relevance, and Beyond the Binary is kind of really leading the way on it. 30 years ago, curators wrote labels through academic research. Then relationships were built up with originating communities, and communities were consulted over labels in the museum. And by the early 21st century, visitors began to see the names and hear the voices of those people and their understanding of what these objects meant in their own cultures. And increasingly, originating communities started writing labels in the museum. And this was very much led by a curator of ours, Laura Peers. But the thing that's changed over the last couple of years is that when we were working with originating communities and they were writing labels, they were often doing it as a volunteer, but the curator was being paid to write labels. So something we've done through the Multaka Oxford project, through Beyond the Binary, through Verb, is beginning to pay people for their professional input. That's something that's going to continue. And it's really important that if we're taking professionalism and ideas from people, that we recognize that in the way we would with any other professional. Now, before Beyond the Binary came along as a project, there were no queer lives represented in the Pitt Rivers Museum, and no queer stories were told. In fact, to visit the Pitt Rivers, it would have been easy to imagine that there are no queer people in the world, and that gender and sexuality can only be seen from a Western perspective. That's changing with temporary exhibitions like Beyond the Binary. It's also changing in the galleries with permanent interventions. That's exciting, and doubly so to think that we are only at the beginning of this change, that we and you are going to queer the Pitt Rivers Museum. So there's a lot of interventions. We're just going to talk about a few of them. One of my favorite is objects that are already there, and it's about thinking about how we change the views of those objects. So we have three people that are going to talk about their interventions today. We have Beth Asprey, who's at home, which is going to be coming in through Zoom. And Beth spearheaded the telling of LGBTQ+ stories through the Out in Oxford project, without which Beyond the Binary never would have happened. So it's really great to have Beth here today talking about her intervention. We have Dottie Clay, who's been a long-term museum partner and contributor to Beyond the Binary. And we have Mara Gold, who was the Beyond the Binary researcher. So with no further ado, I'm going to go over to Mara, who's in the galleries, with Josie, the exhibition curator, and they are going to talk about an intervention there. So over to you guys.
Hello, so I'm Mara. As Andy said, I was the researcher, and so my role on the project was to sort of look into the existing collections and see what, sort of LGBTQ and sort of, Beyond the Binary stories we could tell from objects already in the collections. When I first started, one of the things that I was struck with is the fact that, so many of the places represented in the museum, did have relative freedom in terms of kind of gender and sexuality pre-colonization. So that was something I really wanted to look at. And being from Aotearoa, New Zealand, one of the first things I thought about was this cook cabinet behind me. So it's a very large, lovely display of the Cook Voyage collection. And now for me, I felt like, maybe it could have been framed in a different way, essentially, focusing on the actual people whose lives were affected and oppressed by the Europeans, rather than focusing on the kind of journey of the Europeans and what they thought about the people in the Pacific Islands and Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so one of the things that is really kind of clear in the Pacific Islands is that most of those islands do have either a third gender or a more sort of kind of fluid approach to gender and sexuality. And so you've got different identities. For example, in Tonga, you have Whakaleti. In Samoa, you have Whawhaine. And in Tahiti, you have Mahu. Also in Hawaii, it's Mahu as well. And they're all very much kind of connected to the mythology of the area, and very much they were a very important part of the culture before the Europeans came and ruined everything, essentially. So a lot of these identities were eradicated, they were made illegal, and people were criminalized for it. And not only that, but people, the indigenous people of the islands, a lot of them were converted to Christianity, and then the Europeans used them as a weapon to oppress their own people through kind of Western Christianity. And so what I thought, we should be doing, what we all thought we should be doing, is putting an intervention into this cook cabinet and making it sort of, a very clear statement about this kind of first contact with the Europeans actually kind of being the beginning of the oppression of a lot of these kind of fluid genders and sexualities in these areas. And we've got here, and maybe Josie will, we might have zoomed in already, but a photograph here of Shigeyuki Kihara, who is a contemporary Samoan artist and activist. And this photo kind of shows a really kind of clear example of contemporary artists and activists in those areas, particularly Whawhaine, Whakalete, that sort of thing, are using kind of traditional techniques in order to create kind of contemporary activism and send on messages kind of about themselves, from themselves, rather than these kind of very colonial depictions of them, which is why in the photo series that they've got printed here from Shigeyuki Kihara kind of uses this very sort of traditional colonial gaze for the setup of the photographs, to kind of not only make a point about the way that Europeans were seeing them, but also the way that they were weaponizing those of their own culture to kind of see them as something different, and kind of in some ways commodifying from them. So, and Shigeyuki Kihara kind of talks about this still happening today with documentary makers, anthropologists and things like that, where they're kind of expecting sort of primitive, almost kind of gender that's sort of connected to nature in opposition to civilized Western, gender identities, which is obviously ridiculous and horrible. So, yeah, she really makes these very poignant images about that, and also performance art as well. And I just wanted to give a quote by another Samoan artist who has worked with Shigeyuki Kihara on a book called Queer Samoan Lives, or Samoan Queer Lives, sorry. And Dan McLellan, who we had here for a panel the other day, and who we're hoping to work with to create a commission, maybe based around this cabinet itself. And I just wanted to read a quote because it really helped me understand this kind of thinking around gender and how it's not kind of binary. So Dan says, like much Samoan thinking, it is not binary and oppositional, but bilateral and reciprocal. So I think that's a really helpful way to think about kind of thinking on the islands, not just in terms of gender and sexuality, but just kind of in general. And it wasn't until kind of very recently that some of these laws against homosexuality and also transgender people were actually eradicated. So, for example, again, in Samoa, it wasn't until the 90s that the law against Whawhaine, which they put in a law called that was against impersonation of a female by a man. So that was specifically to criminalize Whawhaine, and by criminalizing these identities, they're actually really like striking a blow at the heart of those cultures, because as I said, they had quite an important place within the cultures. Sometimes families would sort of try and designate a child to be Whawhaine or Mahu, Whakalete, but these days it's generally people tend to self-identify, and it's got kind of a broader meaning. Whereas in the past, I think sometimes they were relegated to traditionally kind of feminine activities, whereas now it's again, it's this kind of new contemporary activism is rising that's connected, very much connected to this traditional culture as well as mythology. So, for example, on the panel we had the other day, we had Pinale Moana Wonkalu from Hawaii, who's made this wonderful short film. I would recommend checking it out. It's only 9 minutes, called Kape Mahu, which is about the origin story of the kind of the agenda on Mahu in Hawaii, of these kind of 4 spirits that arrive from Tahiti, and it's all very much connected to healing. So yeah, if you want to learn more about that, I'd recommend that. And then we're just going to go along to one of the other items in the cook cabinet. So I can tell you a little story from Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I just wanted to show you this flute here, if you are able to see it, which is, we have a similar one in the exhibition actually, and I thought this was a really great way to tell the story of the identity of Takatapui, which is the kind of Maori umbrella term for LGBTQ. It was originally in a 1930s dictionary, Maori English dictionary, as intimate companion of the same sex, but the scholar Dr. Elizabeth Kerikeri, again, who came to our panel, watch that on YouTube too if you want to know more, did some research into kind of old Maori manuscripts looking into this term, and kind of found that actually it was a kind of did mean something more than just friends. And so this has now become this kind of very much a kind of umbrella term for Maori people. No one else should identify as this, I should add. It's very specific again to the culture, which was also much more fluid prior to colonization, and all these horrible laws were put in. So yeah, and not also quite sexually free as well, in a lot of the communities. So again, this kind of Takatapui activists like Dr. Elizabeth Kerikeri are trying to bring back these stories so that contemporary Maori people kind of have that connection to the past, and it's not a kind of Western identity, but it's very much to do with their own culture. So the reason behind the flute was that there's a quite famous Maori legend or myth about Tutanekai and Hinamoa, about their union that was, considered to be unsuitable, and then they went through basically huge struggles to be with each other. But Elizabeth Kerikeri in her research actually found an alternate version of the story, where Tutanekai, actually his heart is with his male companion, his Takatapui, which the word is used in that text. And it was called Tiki, and they would play their flutes to each other from across the sea, and that was a way to kind of express their love. So they eventually, in this version, were able to get together, and Tutanekai's sister married Tiki, and they actually all as a kind of a foursome, and we don't know exactly what their kind of sexual arrangement was, but the fact that they kind of, they made this their own family, their chosen family, through these kind of intimate connections with each other. And the music is still really very much important to Takatapui community today, and so I thought the flute was a really great way to show that. So please do check out the panel as well, as I said, to learn more, and of course come to the exhibition, because we've got more about Takatapui and Whawhaini and other kind of gender identities that were oppressed by colonization in the exhibition.
Great, thank you, Mara. That was excellent. Yeah, really. Unfortunately, it doesn't do it justice on the screen of seeing the objects in reality, but do come along to the museum. I'm now going to move on to Beth, who hopefully will join us from somewhere in Reading. Are you there, Beth? Excellent, yes. And you're on mute at the moment. Great.
How about now? Okay.
Yes, that's good. Thanks.
Fantastic. Beth. I will share my screen. Can everyone see that okay? Hopefully.
Yes, yep, you can see that.
Fantastic, thanks Andy. So hello, my name's Beth Asbury, my pronouns are she, her, and I used to work at the Pitt Rivers Museum and kind of feel like I'm Beyond the Binary's grandmother, as I was responsible for its predecessor, a pilot project that resulted in an LGBTQIA+ trail across the university's collections called Out in Oxford. Out in Oxford started back in 2016 when I went to a talk for LGBT+ History Month by Professor Richard Parkinson of the Oriental Institute at the university about a similar trail that he worked on when he worked at the British Museum called Desire, Love, Identity, which also resulted in a book called A Little Gay History, which was very much the model for Out in Oxford. Richard said that he would like all museums to have at least one object on permanent display related to LGBTQIA+ identities and histories, and that prominent institutions have a responsibility to stand up for inclusive human rights prominently. You can still watch his talk at the link at the bottom of that slide, and I'd encourage you to because it's fantastic. Out in Oxford was the university's first cross-collections trail and the collection's first LGBTQIA+ project, with 51 new interpretations of 35 items across the university's 7 collections, written by volunteers who identify as LGBTQIA+ or as allies, with forewords written by Stephen Fry and by Richard. You can still access the trail booklet and the content online at the link on the right-hand side of the slide. And the gorgeous Q logo that we use for the Out in Oxford Trail was designed by 2 members of My Normal. The trail was launched during LGBT+ History Month in 2017 to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the partial decriminalisation of homosexuality in England and Wales, with several amazing launch events at the Pitt Rivers Museum, organised by Josie and co-curated by our volunteers. One of the stories that we wanted to include in Out in Oxford, but couldn't because nothing relevant was on display at the time, can now be told in Beyond the Binary's new trail, now that this box of medallions is on display on the top floor of the museum, the upper gallery. So General Augustus Henry Lane Fox Pitt Rivers is often said to be the father of British archaeology, and it was his donation of some of his collection to the University of Oxford in 1884 that founded the Pitt Rivers Museum, which is named after him. These medallions or medalettes were specially made for him to date stamp and put into his excavation trenches before backfilling them. The box was donated to the museum in 1971 by Pitt Rivers' great-grandsons, Michael and Anthony Pitt Rivers. In March 1954, Michael Pitt Rivers, who is on the left in the photo on the left of the screen, was involved in a high-profile court case alongside his cousin, Edward Douglas Scott Montague, who's in the centre, and their friend, the journalist and novelist Peter Wildbud, who's on the right. After an 8-day trial, Pitt Rivers and Wildbud were sent to prison for 18 months and Montague for 12 months for conspiracy to incite certain male persons to commit serious offences with male persons. This was the same charge brought against Oscar Wilde in 1895, and which had been a criminal offence since 1533. In September 1954, as a result of public backlash against witch hunts like that of the Montague case, the Departmental Committee on Homosexual Offences and Prostitution, also known as the Wolfenden Committee, first met. Sir John Wolfenden, who was the head of the committee and who went to Magdalen College, Oxford, was the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Reading at the time. The Wolfenden Report was subsequently published in 1957 and recommended that homosexual behaviour between consenting adults should no longer be a criminal offence. However, it wasn't until 1967, 10 years later, that the Sexual Offences Act was passed, decriminalising sex in private between 2 consenting men over the age of 21 in England and Wales, but not in Scotland or Northern Ireland, and not in the Merchant Navy or Armed Forces. This same change in the law didn't happen until 1980 in Scotland and 1982 in Northern Ireland, but it was still an important step towards equal rights in the UK. Michael went on to marry Sonia Brownell, George Orwell's widow, in 1958, but they divorced in 1965. He spent most of his life with his partner, the artist William Gronow Davis, who you can see in this photo. Peter Wildeblood, who went to Trinity College in Oxford, was the royal correspondent to the Daily Mail at the time of the trial. He was one of the first men in the UK to publicly come out when he admitted to being homosexual during the trial. He wrote a book about his experiences called Against the Law a year after the trial in 1955, and a second book, A Way of Life, a year after that in 1956. If you can see the cover of A Way of Life, there's a great quote, "People who will be shocked by this book are in need of shocking," and that's from the Oxford Mail, no less. Wildeblood was an important and influential witness in the Wolfenden Report and was the only openly gay witness to be interviewed. Against the Law was used in the Channel 4 programme A Very British Sex Scandal for the 40th anniversary of the change in the law in 2007, and for the BBC's drama of the same name, Against the Law, for the 50th anniversary in 2017, which prompted a really interesting article in The Guardian about the court case, which you can read at the link at the bottom of the screen. Lord Montague, the 3rd Baron Montague of Beaulieu, went to New College, Oxford, and came out as bisexual when he published his memoirs Wheels Within Wheels in 2002. He founded the National Motor Museum in Beaulieu, at Beaulieu in Hampshire, and was the chairman of English Heritage in 1984 to 1992. In 2017, he said, "I am proud that the so-called Montague case had more effect on changing the laws than any other factor. I think because of the way we behaved and conducted our lives afterwards, because we didn't sell our stories, just returned quietly to our lives. That had a big effect on public opinion." And you can see these medallions, as I said, in the corner of the run of archaeology display cases that are on the top floor. And this is case 69B, just on the corner as you go right up to the top. Thanks very much for listening.
Oh, sorry, thank you, Beth. I hadn't heard that story in quite so much detail before, and that's really good. I'd read various bits that were going into the exhibition, but it's really good to hear the depth of that and just what a crucially important event at a really important moment in time as well. So thank you so much, Beth, and please do come back for the Q&A at the end. And we're now going to go over to Dottie Clay. Dot is in the court of the Pitt Rivers with Josie, and here they are.
Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm here in front of my little friend Chicken Legs over here, who hopefully Katie can get us in and have a little look at. So this is my kind of, I don't know, like my favorite thing in the museum, I guess. It's like a bit of an idol that I have a lot of personal connection with. Mostly because if you look at me, look at Chicken Legs, I think we've kind of got like a shared family history somewhere. I just said in a little thing here, I just feel a lot of kind of connection to it because I'm kind of bi-gendered and I don't really sort of feel very male or female, and also I often get referred to as an animal, mostly by my partner Maya, who's wandering around with other exhibits, but I've been called all sorts of animals, but nice ones, hedgehogs, koalas, fluffy things generally. But you can't see, unfortunately, because the little sign is now hiding the most important part of the feet, are now being covered up by a little sign, unfortunately. But I'm just going to like read through a little sort of thing that I've written about him, and hopefully Andy can keep up with flicking the photos. So I've been chasing Chicken Legs across the internet. He or she is a mystery, a riddle that my mind cannot solve, yet my soul is grasping for answers. I've been poring through pages of pictures of statues, representations of sadhus, carvings, ancient, primitive, crude, and modern, but nothing fits. Nothing jumps up and says, "This way to the checkout." He, she is a shaman, a god, a spirit, a mystic, a Sufi. He, she runs away from me, stalking and clucking, riding a bullock, wearing a jester's hat, dancing and mocking me, shaking his or her dreadlocks in dual ecstasy. He or she is a sentry. He or she stands guard at the sanctuary. He or she defies you to enter without making the proper sacrifices, without offering yourself fully to him or her. He or she invites you to cast off your assumptions about what he or she is, about what you, it, are. You are no longer a woman. You are no longer a man. You are no longer human, no longer even What is Chicken Legs? Who made him or her? What does he or she represent? Even where is he from? I'm afraid I've lost face in the database. The oracle of all knowledge anthropological that we Rivers devotees approach with our slips of paper, hoping to receive the sparse words of wisdom that she issues. 1886, 1212, 1886, 1212, 1886, 1212, my accession number mantra. I go back again and again. I panic when I discover that the oracle has been reconfigured. The information I look for has suddenly become sparse and unavailable. Luckily, Andy came to the rescue and found the information I'd only half remembered. It is all tentative and question marked. I'm going to quickly find the stuff that basically this is what you can find on the database if you know how. Basically, it says maybe made of wood, maybe it's black and red, maybe it's from Pakistan, maybe it's from Bangladesh, maybe it has a lion's head in its crotch, maybe not. We don't know where it's from. We basically think that Richard Rawlinson wrote some notes about it in 1719 and he was a don at St John's College in Cambridge. He then donated to the Ashmolean, which then got donated to here in 1886. What we do know is that there was a note made saying that he appears in a book from 1634 called The Travels of Sir Thomas Herbert. It's actually got a much longer title, but I won't want to read it out if it takes forever. However, if we could quickly click over, Andy, to the picture of the illustration, that'd be nice. You can see that. So I was intrigued by the mention that chicken legs appeared in a book from 1634. And the British Library, oddly, and other websites. I finally found it where else on Google Books. There he or she is being pointed at by a robed figure who is purportedly a banyan, which means an Indian merchant, but it looks more like a Venetian doge. His or her legs look a little bit more curvy in the illustration, more sprightly, like he or she is about to spring off the plinth and go for a jog around the block, but it's definitely him, her. It just doesn't make sense though. I've asked Indian sculpture experts from the Hindu Studies Centre and none of them can identify chicken legs. One said I should look up Lursi statues. This is the next illustration, if you would, Andy. The Thai representation of wizards or holy men. And there's some kind of resemblance to those figures, if you can see them on the screen. They're kind of quite crudely made, some of them, but they're all seated. The style is still wrong. My chicken legs looks kind of brutal. He doesn't look transcendent or meditative. He or she looks kind of angry, like he's just spotted you nicking his bike. If he or she is Indian, maybe the dreadlocks are a clue. Here we're going to go to slide 4, please, the next one. Perhaps he represents sadhu or guru. I looked at representations of sadhu in statuary, but again, they're often seated, except this one, which I think is the one you're looking at. His legs also look kind of chickenish. That's the one I managed to find that looks kind of similar. He could be a Shaivite sadhu, perhaps the strange horned codpiece here is some representation of Nandi the bull. Maybe it's a depiction of Bhairava, the fierce incarnation of Shiva, perhaps in a protective god form of Vajra Bhairava. This is slide number 5, and if you can quickly flip through it. But again, it looks more like a Garuda in that image, and though the Bhairava often appears coloured red, there's no indication of bigenderism. You can quickly put a Garuda picture down if you can. That's number 6. Further east in Thailand, there's a human-bird hybrid creature called a Kimana, which you often see in temples. And these often also originate from Hinduism or Buddhism, and they also guardian spirits. They do appear to be, they come in a male version and a female version. And Thai culture, of course, has got a long history of having third gender people, but I can't find any. Association with asceticism and spirituality. Parvati's mirror associates her with the material world of Maya. Hello, Maya. I had to get you in there somewhere, sorry. According to the Shaiva guru Sivaya Subrameshwari, Ardhanarishvara is beyond gender. The right half of Ardhanarishvara is male and the left is female. So you see here, it's top and bottom, it's not left and right, so it doesn't really fit. But Ardhanarishvara does have a bull and a lion as their symbols. One is for Shiva and one for Parvati. So in the description, it says that this thing at the crotch could be a lion bull hybrid. Don't know about that.
So maybe that is Shiva and the other.
So maybe the head is Shiva, and Shiva is an ascetic, and maybe the breasts represent the female Shakti energy. It could be something to do with that. So in that Wikipedia article, it also talks about in this nation of like the being that God is represented by male and female. This idea of the coincidentia oppositorum, which I've just been reading about in another article I found, which is at lmrom.com under the androgynous shaman. And it says that the coincidentia oppositorum is the simultaneous reality of the opposites, described as the least imperfect definition of God. Iliad in his book, The Two and the One, describes the way in which the coincidentia oppositorum is dealt with universally by all religion, and especially that part of religion which is concerned with ultimate reality. Iliad shows the universality of androgyny in myth, and especially in theogony. That's like God birth. It gives the example of the Jewish midrash, the Gnostic Christian tradition, Greek philosophy and mythology, and more. Along with coexisting opposites of good and evil, light and darkness, chaos and form, virtual and manifest, the female and male are considered inherent to the divine mystery of the ultimate existence of the one. As an exemplary expression of the creative power, bisexuality is ranged among the glories of divinity. I like to think that myself. So that ties in, this is frame number 9, and if you can, which would be Proteus. Proteus is a Greek god who's also often represented in the kind of capsule-shaped thing, and also is represented with breasts and with male body parts as well, and often is wrapped up in a snake or some other creature. So there's some sort of similarity with that, and also with Hermaphroditus, the bi-gendered god or goddess, who is often shown as having wings. Unfortunately, and now this little fellow or chapess down here may have had a tail, certainly not any wings. So we don't really know if there's any connection there, but certainly I would say classically that this character is a hermaphrodite figure or an androgynous figure. Another friend I showed this image to thought that maybe there was some connection with the god Baphomet, who was famously worshipped by the Knights Templar and got in trouble, in fact got them all burnt at the stake, which was a bit of a bad deal for them in the 14th century. So Baphomet is often represented, as in the image, hopefully you can show this next one, number 10, that has got the god with horns and boobs. So if you're looking for horns and boobs, you've got a fairly horny figure here. So this horn god ties into the description of the Banyan or Hindu practices that accompany the illustration in Thomas Herbert's 1634 book that they worship the devil in sundry shapes and representations. The picture you're looking at now, hopefully on the screen, is by Eliphas Levi, and it's one of the most famous ones. If you like heavy metal, you'll basically see that picture somewhere. But moving on, also, I get reminded very much of the Burney relief, which is often called the Queen of the Night in the British Museum because of her association with owls. She's also got bird's legs, and hopefully we'll see illustration number 11. And a depiction of Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld and Ishtar's sister. So I kind of feel also that this kind of figure is somehow kind of like a guardian figure, possibly a guardian to the underworld. Don't know, could be. I see him or her also with an animal mouth at crotch level, the Shinanagig, the wide-fannied creature that haunts churches and graveyards across the UK, Ireland, and other parts of Europe. And I had to mention that because Raga will be watching hopefully at some point, and I do think there's some sort of similarity. Oh, quickly also, the Queen of the Night character is kind of like, this is something like an opposite, because Queen of the Night is kind of like obviously a female, and this is a male.
How do you know that that's male?
Well, because it's got a male head, so I suppose the head generally tends to be the bit that we make the most association with. So if it's got a very bearded head,
But just,
then it's kind of like the male version of the female Queen of the Night, maybe.
maybe it's just got that whatever it's called when you get.
Oh yeah,
hypertrichosis
or something like that. Yes, could be a bearded lady. So I'm probably aware we're running out of time, so I'll get on quickly. So in many cultures, So something about chicken legs makes me think that there's something more human than godlike about this character. It's not really, doesn't feel like a god. It feels to me more like it could be a representation of a witch doctor or maybe a medicine man. In many cultures, African American, Siberian, the shaman is connected with bigenderism. Initiates into the practice often go through periods of cross-dressing and living as women before they become full shaman. Shaman are also connected with animals and believe themselves capable of transforming into animals and birds. This is also a feature of other limnal characters like the witch, the werewolf, and the vampire. Perhaps this accounts for the chicken legs. I feel there's definitely something shamanic in chicken legs. He or she transgresses, crosses, and divides. The shaman, this is another quote from lmrm.com. The shaman, fearless in transcending pain and pleasure, flesh and spirit, male, female, uniquely transcends the duality of order and chaos, the ordinary and extraordinary, and is therefore a master of travel back and forth between them. Is chicken legs a guardian of the underworld, a fertility symbol, a protecting deity, a representation of the shamanic ability to transcend gender and transform into animals? I find it hard to pin him or her down. Nothing quite seems to stick. He or she defies academic description. Maybe a poem will make more sense. Have I got time for a quick poem?
Go on, Dot. Yeah.
So this is my poem about chicken legs I wrote today. You look surprised to see me, standing in your sentry box like some strange guardian, like when I raised your legs to change your nappy, Betsy. Is that a yak in your codpiece, or are you just pleased to see me? What adventures have you been on? Were you really a banyan special offer? Did you accept his offers, live under a banyan tree, decked in flowers, watched and watching flickering flames? Were you an outcast like me? Where have you been hiding for centuries? What have your wide eyes seen? Are you Indian, Polynesian, Sogdian, Balkan? Have another name once? In the world that you come from, do you hang out with other Shimmerer? Do you nod to the Sphinx on your way to work, exchange pleasantries with basilisks, gossip with wyverns about the narcissistic tendencies of the Kanara? Are you what Brahma made from the leftovers of the Garuda? Are you related to the Queen of the Night? Do you long to take flight, break out of your cage and go on a rampage? How did you end up this way? Do you listen when I pray? Anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you can come and have a look at him, her, it, them, they, whatever they are, on your own sometime and have a look at the thing I wrote about.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, Dot. Really enjoyed it. I think I just about managed to keep up with the slides.
Thank you very much.
I did lose my connection at one point, but we got it back again. So that was great. And I just because I've been concentrating on that, I have been looking whether anyone has any questions for either Dot, Beth, or Mara, or even myself or Josie.
Here.
Yeah. Can I ask, I'm Josie, I'm the Beyond the Binary Project curator, and I just wanted to really thank everyone for talking, and I just wanted to point out how different, or I don't need to point out how different everyone's talk's been, and I think that says a lot about the exhibition and how diverse it is, and I've really enjoyed listening to Dot, Beth and Mara all give very different spins on things, so thank you. And that wasn't a question, it was just a comment really. So I'm going to put the camera back on Dot if anyone's got questions.
Let's see if we can bring up Beth and Mara as well. We have Beth back. We don't have very many people in the event. It's obviously it's going to go out to the world. We don't have any coming in. Do come and have a look at the interventions. I think there's a really crucial thing with the interventions. And I think the talks have really shown it, that we all bring our own individuality to these interventions. And how inspiring is it to, if you think about the variety of approaches that we have just heard from Dot, from Beth, and from Mara, and imagine a museum full of that kind of variety of voices. How would anyone ever want to go back to just the curatorial voice? That's not to say curatorial voices aren't important. The research that curators do are really important in how we understand objects, but the lived experience, the personal connections that we make, to me really feels that is what the Pitt Rivers Museum is about. And I'm that's, you know, and that we're going to add more of these voices and more of these stories as we go along. Steve Walker has his hand up. Steve, would you like to ask a question? I think I can. No, I've lost you. Oh yeah, it's in the. Is it in the chat? Okay. Jonah Coman has asked, how do you make visible this kind of plurality of stories in the physical museum? That's a good question, Jonah. I think there's, I mean, I will start the answer on that. I don't know if anyone else wants to step in at some point. I think there's a real issue for a museum like the Pitt Rivers. When you have object labels that are just written by a curator, then they can be very short. And there's something like 50,000 visible objects in the Pitt Rivers Museum. Once you start adding personal stories, as we can see in the Beyond the Binary exhibition, they need more time, they need more space. So it's something that's going to be quite difficult to do, but clearly the interventions that we've got, and I think there's 12 of them around the museum for Beyond the Binary, the detail is either there or it links you somewhere else. And I think there's a wonderful one on the middle floor, Joanna Wardrop, who's an artist based in London. And Joanna was looking at fake beards worn by women historically in Angola. I think there was some film made of women wearing these fake beards in the 1930s, but it's not a practice that's current in Angola at the moment. But Joanne thought, what an amazing thing, these fake beards, why are people wearing them? What would it feel like? So she made 100 beards and she got her friends and family, including her grandmother, I think, to wear them around London. And then she photographed and filmed the responses of people and these beards were very, very fake beards. So there's a link in there to a bit of film. There's labels that go there. There's photographs. There's a range of different things. And I think ultimately we will look at using technology. That's the only way that we can really springboard these stories in the future without just turning the Pitt Rivers into a large piece of paper, because the museum is and will remain about objects and the people that made those objects.
I've just asked Dot if Dot's got any thoughts, and Dot has, so let's hear from Dot.
Only quickly, which is just that, yeah, and obviously, as you said, Andy, I think like obviously trying to find more ways to incorporate, you know, virtual reality, augmented reality, digital media into the gallery. I think like the question originally about physically including them, I think that is going to be very difficult without having some, you know, I mean, I think it'd be nice to have some more like stands, more display screens. And maybe, you know, have more sort of stories sort of playing on a loop, or having stuff that you can like flick through in the future. That would be great. And I think like obviously phones and stuff, you know, people have now got the ability to see all sorts of information related to what they're looking at. So that that's going to bring a whole exciting new dimension, I think, to gallery curation and to opening it up to people from the general public, or, you know, specially picked people to add their stories. This place is full of stories and they're not all getting heard at the same time.
Steve has a question. I've just allowed you to speak, Steve. So
hi, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah. It's a kind of a question and an observation. It's about the Lord Montague, Earl Montague of Bewley, and I didn't know that story. And when I was younger, my father took me to the car museum. My father was a very mad, keen car fanatic, and I was very interested. It's a great place, but cars are quite a male occupation and interest. Now, I think I'm not speaking out of turn. My father would have probably been horrified about that court case. He's not been a liberal person, but my question is kind of did the attendance at the museum affect how people address this? Was it a well-known story and people would have been aware of it because he's never said anything to me, or was a story like that swept under the carpet? The way you've presented it, Beth, I think it sounds like it was a big story at the time. But
yeah, my understanding of the Montague case is that it was a really big deal, and that's why it is so closely attributed as one of the reasons why the Wolfenden Committee was then formed, because people were tired, I think, of these witch hunts. In the States, they were called lavender hunts or something like that, after the big anti-red campaigns, anti-Soviet and fear of communism kind of campaigns that took place in America. After that, there was a huge campaign to remove gay people from high-profile roles within the American government, and that affected a lot of I think, political viewpoints in the UK, and so similar sort of lavender trials, I think that's what they were called, were taking place in the UK as well. It wasn't safe for many people to be homosexual in the 1950s. It was very underground. It was scary. The police would basically entrap people with honeypots, and I'm not sure why there was such a change in public opinion against that happening, but certainly the Montague case is the one that people most often attribute to that change in public ideas. And as Montague himself said, he thought it was because they served their time and they went back to their lives. And what I tried to show in my presentation was that although they had all served jail time, they had lives after that. They didn't go into hiding. They had, I hope, a positive life afterwards. They had partners. Wild Blood was incredibly influential with the content of the Wolfenden Report. And like I said in my talk, we wanted to tell that story out in Oxford, but connecting to the question at the beginning about the restraints of being able to tell the multiple stories connected to the objects in the museum, because out in Oxford was a more low budget and smaller pilot project. We made a decision early on that the trail would only work if objects were already on permanent display. And at the time, nothing that Michael Pitt Rivers had donated to the museum was on display. The run of archaeology display cases that's now on the upper gallery came after the Out in Oxford project started. And I lobbied quite hard to try and get those medallions included in that case so that there would be an opportunity in the future to then tell Michael Pitt Rivers' story. Because for the museum to have such a direct connection to what at the time would have been very traumatic, I'm sure, for Michael, his cousin, and Wild Blood, in the long run was a positive event. It had a positive effect on the change in the law. The law wasn't as broad as it could have been, and much more legislation is still needed, but it was an important event and an important step forward, I think. And I really wanted the museum to be able to share that, which we can now through Beyond the Binary, which is fantastic. I hope that answers the question. I feel like
thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah.
I'm not doing very well at unmuting myself today. Do we have any more questions?
Not a question, but I thought I might just add something to the previous question, if that's all right. Also, thank you, Beth. I really love your intervention upstairs on those, so it's brilliant. And that's kind of what I just wanted to talk about, was on the showing the plurality of stories. And I'm not sure if it was as clear in the video, but the you can sort of see behind dots there the intervention labeling, and it is very it is, you know, quite in your face when you see it. Your eye is sort of drawn to that, and often that is put next to the old museum label as well. So I think people will be kind of really drawn to those out in the main galleries. So so I think that's quite important. And then to have those kind of two stories side by side. And I personally really hope that the museum kind of continues to do those kinds of interventions, you know. That's and also one thing is I'm hoping, or maybe this could be you know, further Beyond the Binary project is to really look at the databases and how things are being catalogued, so that, you know, people, not just researchers but members of the public, can find objects on the public catalogue and in the, you know, museum's kind of you know, database, internal database that are related to these LGBTQ stories. And I think they've started doing that with the Beyond the Binary acquisitions, is putting those kind of personal stories I think on the database. Andy might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but that's something that I'd really like the museum to start implementing as, you know, not just part of a project, but as a kind of, you know, permanent practice.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely crucial going forward, that the database does change. We've been working on it. The museum databases are in a moment of change at the moment. So we go from one system to another, and we were hoping that this project would really change the way we use databases. I think the truth is that it has changed the way the database works in the museum, but not as much as we had hoped, and there's still work to be done. And that is a shame, but that is the reality of the situation. And one of the things within that, and it's something that we're thinking about, and maybe that, you know, the change can't happen as fast as one wants, but it's something that a lot of museums are talking to each other about at the moment. How do you decolonize databases? How do you queer databases? By decolonization, we mean shifting power structures, and by queering, we mean looking at the multiple stories that are available out there. And to be able to do that on a database, you have to change the hierarchies. But databases are almost, by their very essence, a hierarchical structure of information. So that's something that we're really thinking about. We don't have the answer yet. We've made some changes, but I think there will be further changes. And I think the momentum we now have through Beyond the Binary within the museum, and also within the museum world, is momentum that's going to carry us forward into significant change in the future, which is quite a positive thing to think about.